The day I left, the sun was high in the sky and the weather merciful. It was just an ordinary hike on a trail I'd done a dozen times or so. It's a spot I've grown fond of over the years, and I hiked it in winter as I did in summer, with confidence in every step and knowledge that I could find my way back easily, even if I lost the trail. I didn't account for a shift of weather meaner than a junkyard dog. The trail up and down the mountain is maybe 8 hours at worst, and that's if you take your time. You leave at 10 in the morning, take a couple of pauses here and there, and you're back at the bottom before 8. It was going to be that easy, even accounting for the snow and the effort. I don't want to sound like I'm boasting, but I'm a healthy man, and I had been hiking this trail for years. I knew it as well as I knew my backyard. There was no way I could get lost. And with the weather presenting itself as this warm and good in the middle of February, I couldn't resist going for a hike. Normally, I'd stop hiking at the end of November and only start again in the middle or late March. And with the weekend announcing such weather, I couldn't resist. I wanted my girlfriend to come with me because I know she likes hiking too, but she had to stay back to babysit her sister's baby for the weekend. I asked her if she needed my help, but she sent me off with a smile. I just reached the top when the weather started to shift. The view from the top of the mountain was beautiful. I got caught in the euphoria of being at the top and seeing the trees covered in snow. I could even, if I squinted, see the nearest town a few kilometers away. I couldn't see the bottom of the trail too well because of how much snow there was, but I knew the way by heart, so I didn't feel like I needed to. That is, until I felt the first gust of wind and snow sway my body. I'm not a tiny man. I stand 6'2" and weigh approximately 190 pounds. I train a lot to be able to enjoy hiking to the fullest. But that wind, it was strong enough to move me. That's when I decided that no matter how beautiful the view, I needed to go back down as quickly as possible. Being caught in a snowstorm, even when you know the trail by heart, is the last thing you want to do. I thought I had time, but I didn't. 15 minutes after the first wind and snow, my vision was reduced to about 20%. The snow was falling so hard and fast I could barely see in front of me. All I could see was a flurry of snow on a pale gray background. I wasn't even close to the tree line when I lost my footing and went tumbling down like an idiot. I sprained my ankle in my fall, but was lucky enough to grab onto a rock to stop my continuous tumbling. I lied down on the cold snow for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. The time it took to gather my spirit. Then I stood up and pain radiated from my ankle to my knee. It was so intense, I felt my stomach churning. I looked left and right and then down, trying my best to find the trail or a way to it, but I couldn't. The snowstorm seemed to intensify by the minute, and so did the wind. I started walking toward what I hoped was the right direction. I hoped my tumbling down the mountain didn't disorient me too much. I kept walking despite my injury, but I couldn't see well where I was going. The cold was starting to hurt my eyes. There were even snowflakes sticking to my lashes, making it even harder to see. I couldn't even see my breath despite the cold because of how much snow was swirling around by the storm. It was until I saw it. The opportunity to rest. A short way from where I was standing was a black dot, and it was growing with every step. I'd never seen this opening before when I went down the mountain, even in winter. I was probably further from the path than I thought, but for now, I needed shelter. I made my way to the cave, hoping that I would find safety in there until the snowstorm passed. After all, how long could a snowstorm last? A day, maybe 2 at best? And I was sure my girlfriend would send someone, and search and rescue teams would be here soon enough. With pain keeping me awake and leading my every step, I entered that cave and went as deep as I could until it was pitch black. I threw my backpack on the ground, knowing that the first thing I had to do was start a fire. First, for some heat, and second, for some light. I couldn't feel the wind anymore, but the way my cheeks tingled told me that they were quite frozen. I needed heat if I didn't want to leave this place with frostbite all over my face. I managed to start a fire with what I had in my backpack. I keep little bits of paper and some tinder in there just in case. I was smart enough to put some aside. There wasn't much to look at in the cave, but I could hear water in the far back, so I knew there was probably water I could drink, or maybe try to. But being the cautious guy I am, I started by warming myself up. Once I felt better, I took off my boot. The ankle was worse than I thought. The swelling was insane, and the purplish color I saw in my skin didn't reassure me. I used a bandage around it to try to reduce the swelling, and then wrapped one of my extra t-shirts around it because there was no way I could fit that ankle in the boot until the swelling decreased a little. I looked towards the entrance of the cave and saw snow swirling inside for a few feet. I guess that was a good indication that the snowstorm hadn't ended. And it was time for me to explore the cave. I wanted to make sure I wasn't intruding in a bear's habitat or something. Hibernation or not, I didn't want to bother a couple of sleeping bears and end up minced meat by morning. So even if I couldn't walk properly, I helped myself up with the wall and slowly and painfully made my way to the far back of it, where the water sound came from. I was pleasantly surprised to see that there was nothing else but water in the cave, and that I could even establish a little camp a little further, should the wind and snow find a way in. As strong as the wind was, and with all the whistling, it still wasn't enough to get in as deep as I was. As for the water, I was lucky. It followed cracks in the wall and made a small pool at the bottom. I could easily refill my water bottle should I need to. I at least didn't have to worry about water for the time I would be there, and I was still hopeful that I would be able to leave by morning. Even if the snowstorm was to quiet down in the next hour, it was too late to try and go down the mountain. It would be dangerous, especially since I wasn't on the trail. The sun was going down fast, and trying to hike down without following a trail would prove a stupid choice. It would be better if I just spent the night, waiting for morning and the sun to shine again, and then try to go back down. I mean, again, how long could a snowstorm last? I was sure I would be back home with one hell of a story by the next day. So, with the pain guiding my every step, I made my way back to my little camp, got my extra clothes and sleeping bag out, and prepared to rest. I had half a sandwich and a few nuts, promising myself to ration for tomorrow in case the snowstorm hadn't let down. I drank some water and prayed that what little wood I would have would be enough to keep the fire alive. I was ready to use everything I had in my bag, including my trusty crossword puzzle book if needed. And then I fell asleep. The heat and crackling of the fire lulled me to sleep. When I woke up, it was still dark and my ankle hurt like a bitch. However, with the ashes still red but no flames, I needed to find some things to burn. Getting out of my sleeping bag proved difficult with the disabled ankle, but I managed it. The swelling of my ankle had gone down enough that I could put my boot back on, and so I did. Then I rose, shivered, and started walking towards the entrance of the cave. I picked as many branches as I could find, but I knew this wouldn't be enough to keep the fire alive for long. The closer I got to the entrance, the more I felt it. The gust of wind and snow, so cold, it bit right through my 4 layers, freezing me to my bone. The snowstorm was still raging, and there was no going down the mountain that day, or even going too far from the cave. I would have to deal with the cards I was given, and unfortunately, my hand wasn't strong. I rationed my food for 2 more days. I had enough water, so I didn't need to worry. Fire and heat would become a problem, but I could always use my crossword pages as fire starter and hope for the best with the branches. It wasn't as cold deep in the cave as it was towards the entrance, but I still didn't want to lose some toes. 2 days passed and the snowstorm didn't relent. After the first day, I cut my rations in half, making them last for 4 more days instead of 2. Call me overly cautious, but it ended up necessary because on the 5th day, I ate the last of the trail mix and argued with the sky to give me a beautiful day the next day. But the sun didn't come, and the hopes of getting out of there alive were getting thinner. My ankle was better, but the snowstorm wasn't. I was starting to consider going down the mountain and hope for the best, but if I weren't on the right side of the mountain, I would only lose myself in the dents of the forest and die. I mean, surely someone was looking for me. Even with the storm, they had ways to rescue lost hikers in the mountain, right? The 7th day and the second without food came, and I felt weak, incredibly weak. But still I gathered courage and ambition, and left the sleeping bag and hiking bag behind, and made my way to the entrance of the cave. I was getting out no matter what. At least I thought I was. Equipped only with as many layers as I could and water, I hoped to brave the snowstorm. Not even 20 feet out and I realized how foolish my plan was. The winds were even more violent than the first day of the storm. The snow felt like ice as it hit my face. I tripped and my ankles started to hurt again. I had no choice. I had to get back to the cave. I had next to nothing to make a fire with. A few branches and what I had on me is all. I had no food left. I curled on the floor of the cave and cried, but the tears left an icy trail on my cheek. It wasn't cold enough that the tears themselves would freeze off my face, but it was cold enough that the trail the tears left behind did freeze. When the 3rd day without food, and 8th since I'd gone hiking, arrived, I had almost no energy left. I looked outside the cave and saw the snowstorm still raging on. This had to be the longest, unannounced snowstorm in history. I felt sick to my stomach, but there was nothing there to reject anymore. Hunger made me dizzy and weak, so much that I could barely make it to the back of the cave for some water. I had to eat something if I wanted to survive. I hobbled my way back to the cave entrance and gathered a lot of snow in my arm, then made my way back to camp. At first, I didn't want to contemplate it. I rejected that idea for as long as I could, but come the 4th day, I knew I had no choice. I sat on the ground with one leg extended and the other folded so the flat of my foot rested against the inside of the other leg. I looked at the leg that was bent, the leg with the ankle problem, and I thought, can I last another day without food? Can I survive another day and go down that mountain if the weather is merciful? And the answer was no. I would not survive another night without food. I didn't even know if I could survive the day. I could burn a few t-shirts and whatever wood I had left. I still had a few pages of my crossword book to make a starter. I could make one last fire and eat some meat, and then try to hike down the next day. But I had no medical knowledge except for what I'd seen in the movies. However, some stories ended well with people who had even less knowledge than I do, so maybe I would survive. I could try at least. Tears welled up in my eyes as I took off my boot, then my socks. I needed to keep them dry. I lifted my pant leg all the way up to my knee and stared at my calf. Just a few slices on the fire. Can't be worse than pork. I read somewhere on the internet about a Mexican guy who had his foot amputated and served foot taco meat to himself and a couple of friends who wanted to try. Couldn't be worse than pork. Can't be worse than death. I started the fire with what I had left to burn. I tore one of my many t-shirts and wrapped a piece tightly below my knee. Tightened it so tight I felt my toes tingle. Then, using the snow I'd gathered, I'd froze the skin of my calf. Froze it until it became almost purple from the lack of blood and cold of the snow. Then I got my knife out and bit the binding of my crossword book and avoid biting my tongue. I used my knife to slice a slab of meat out of my calf the size of my palm, and I could hear my blood leaking out like a faucet, the droplets hitting the ground at a nauseous pace. I dropped the knife and hiccuped. It was hard to breathe. It was hard to see. My eyes were watery as hell, and I felt like I was going to pass out from the pain. The snow didn't help like I thought it would. It only made the skin harder to cut. It wasn't a clean cut either. I thought the knife would slice through my skin like it would through bread or butter. But halfway through the cut, I had to give another slice to detach the piece from my leg. There was blood everywhere, and I didn't know how to stop it. Mind you, I was famished and exhausted. So I did what they do in the movies. I put my blade in the fire, waited for a bit, then stuck it against my skin to burn it. I burnt half the gash closed before passing out. And then I woke up to voices. Voices were screaming my name. Seconds later, a strong pair of arms was lifting me, and another pair was grabbing my lower body. I was carried out of the cave and put on a stretcher. They carried me to the trail where a snowmobile was waiting, and they took me down the mountain. Now, I had passed out, and when I woke up, I was at the hospital. My girlfriend was next to me. My leg was tightly wrapped, and I was being fed through a tube. I was alive, and I had survived. But if they had only found me 15 minutes earlier...